Colorado Springs.
Nearly 500,000 people.
Olympic City, USA.
Garden of the Gods.
Pikes Peak.
It's a growing city.
Our local government has a lot of employees. What exactly do they do?
How does it impact my life?
This is where you find out.
Behind the Springs, an inside look at your local government.
Hey everyone, unless you're living in a cave, you may have heard a lot about the presidential election these last few months. And when it comes to city elections, people always tend to hear a little less and know a little less, but they certainly impact your life just as much, if not more. And we have an election coming up here in Colorado Springs on April 6th, and I'm willing to bet you might learn a thing or two during today's conversation with our city clerk. I'm Jen Schrader. I really appreciate you tuning in on Facebook, watching on Springs TV, or listening to this podcast on your favorite platform. And Sarah Johnson is with us. Thank you so much for joining me from several feet away and being here to talk with us about this.
Thank you. I'm excited to tell people about elections and how important it is to vote and to stay involved in your community.
That is for sure. Before we get to the April election, let's talk about you a little bit. Tell us your story, how you came to Colorado Springs. I know you weren't born and raised here, and how you got into your line of work.
Sure. I did my college education in business and got a master's in public administration. And so I graduated from college fully intent on joining the corporate world, and that's what I was going to do. But this summer, between my senior year of college, I had it all figured out. I did an internship with a U.S. Senator in my home state and decided, wow, government's really cool. Why didn't I do political science?
And it totally changed your tune.
It totally changed what I wanted to do. So I ended up working for that senator in a district office right after. I actually had the job before I graduated, which my parents were thrilled to have their child employed after 4 years at a small liberal arts college.
Right.
So they were thrilled, and I just immediately went into that, worked in state government for a number of years, and then at the State Board of Elections in my home state, and really liked elections, did elections all day, every day for quite a long time. Worked for Secretary of State, did a lot with working with the counties on the election side, doing redistricting, those kind of things. And then my Secretary of State that I was working for was termed. And also a new secretary came in, so I was a political appointee of a different political party. So I left that job, as is expected, you know, when you have a change in leadership, just like we have recently had in the presidential level. Right. When the party changes, you know, appointed staff leave. It's expected. Got recruited to come out here to be a city clerk. I had never worked in municipal government, but I had a strong election background, and that's one of the main things they were looking for. And started here, and almost 9 years later, I'm still the city clerk. I enjoy employment, and it's really great to work for this city, and I truly am enjoying working in municipal government. All my experience prior to that was state or federal, so it's really nice. You're closer to the people. You're closer to seeing a project be implemented immediately. There's not that time lag like you see in the federal and city government. So I love Colorado. My new home state is wonderful. I love the lower humidity level. I came from Kentucky, where it was hot and humid in the summers, and it's hot here, but sometimes have to remind myself that it's not as hot as back home. Get over it. Right. Still learning to like the snow. So I'm still a Kentucky freak out when it snows, but I'm getting better. 9 years into it.
Getting to be a better winter driver. Yeah,
absolutely.
So without getting too political, what do you think about all the attention that's being put on the election process right now?
I think on the base level, it's really important for people to know about their election process. What happens when you cast your vote at the polls if you don't live here in Colorado, or when you put your ballot in that ballot box? I think it is important to know what happens. So I think that piece of it, where, you know, people are explaining what happens to your ballot, how it's counted, how it's reviewed, how it's secure, how the tying a person to an actual vote is not possible, and it's not done. So we don't know how you voted. I think that's really good of what's coming out of here. What I don't believe is good is the misinformation, the false information that's coming out from all sides. There's not one party worse at it than the other, to be honest with you. So That part I don't like. It's turning into a real partisan battle, and it really shouldn't be. A lot of election laws constantly need updating, to the current times. And with COVID in the past election, there were a lot of changes, even here in Colorado. Even though we're a model for other states on how we do our elections, the county clerks and the Secretary of State still had to make some changes because of the COVID restrictions. So it's good to constantly review, as the same thing we do here on the municipal level, where, I'm constantly looking at our conduct of election and our city code and the state law, and we're just constantly making improvements to how people vote, what they can do. But the biggest thing is, it's not about making the changes, it's about making the changes and making sure it's secure. And that it's easy on the voter and it's easy on the county or city clerk, in my case, to implement those. So it is good. I just don't like all the false information and the rhetoric that you're getting from both sides. If we need to make a change, let's do it for the good to help everyone, not just one side or the other.
Right, and not just talk the talk, walk the walk,
Correct.
So that we're seeing those real changes implemented.
But it all starts with people voting.
Right.
If we can have the best laws in the country and any level of government, but if people don't take the time to vote, what good are they?
Right. And especially when it comes to these local elections, because there's all this publicity around the presidential election, not so much when it comes to these smaller elections, people consider them, but they are so impactful. So that leads me to your role as city clerk. What exactly do you do in that position?
So as city clerk, one of the things that I do, of course, is elections, and we'll talk a lot more about that today because it's coming up. But a couple of things that we really do that impacts everyone in city government and all the citizens is we work with city council. I'm clerk to council in essence. So I prepare their agendas. We make sure that when they pass ordinances, which is the way that the city enacts laws, is called an ordinance. And so we have to make sure those get published. We have to make sure they're available. We have to make sure our city code, which is our laws. So on the state level, you have statutes. On the city level, you have what's called city code. And so we have to make sure those get updated with the right amount. We are the record keeper. So there's a record of all those council meetings, those very long at times council meetings. I'm right there with council, recording those votes and making sure that what they enact gets codified, so to speak, becomes law. And it's also available for you as citizen in our document search to look that up. And so the city clerk really tends to be the generalist in a city government because of our work with council and our involvement with all the departments, we tend to know what's happening in the city. We're not intimately building that road, right? But we know that on this date, city council passed this law for the funding for that road. So,
and talk about integrity and transparency. I mean, that's a key component to that.
It is. And so making sure that you as citizens have access to where the city code is, if you want to look something up, or, a lot of times people will call the office or email my office going, I don't know who to contact, but this is what I need. So, we help that way. We also do business licensing.
Okay.
So we have liquor licenses, 910 of those throughout the city of Colorado Springs. We do security officers. When you go anywhere and you see private security officers, those are being licensed and regulated through my office. Pawn shops, food trucks, those type things. We're doing that, and we have about 3,700 business licenses that we actively work with our customers on. We also are the record keeper, for the city, coordinate with all the departments, making sure the records are kept properly and according to state law. And then last but not least, my favorite subject are city elections and redistricting.
Okay, and I should say you've been able to maintain that good level of service throughout COVID.
We have business licensing really, and council, for that matter, has not slowed down at all. So we are constantly reaching out to our licensees, making it easier, for them to drop off applications, and then we mail them receipts and we mail them ID cards if it's a security officer. Normally that would just be over the counter, but obviously with COVID restrictions, we can't do that. So Just recently with candidate filing for the election, we had to come up with procedures because normally they would come into my office and we would talk about the procedures, give them the filing documents. This time we had to have a drop-off box in the lobby where candidates could come anytime between 8 and 5, pick up those packets. We did training for the candidates. Normally that's in person. For example, with the great communication staff, we did that virtually.
Okay.
So, we are making a lot of modifications, and stay tuned for more, because as we get closer to our election, the interaction with the citizens is a lot more because they're voting now. So we'll be making constant adjustments. And the good thing about our city election is it's all mail ballot. So the ballot's going to be mailed to your home, just like you received the November ballot. You're going to get a ballot in the mail.
Right, and that's
This time too,
not going to
so
change and everything.
you don't have to leave the comfort of your home and go stand in a long line to cast it on a voting machine. You can vote it and put it in any of 25 drop-off boxes, across the city. So lots of adjustments.
So before we get to what's on that ballot, you mentioned redistricting, and I think there are many people who are not familiar with what in the world that means.
It's true. Sometimes, like all of us, we get kind of caught up in our lingo and our terminology and forget that the general public wants to know, but they don't understand what you just said. So,
Right.
So redistricting we did last year, started in April through November. And what all of that is simply the city charter, which is like our city constitution on a municipal level, requires the clerk and a committee to take a look at the 6 city council districts. So let me back up for a second. There are 9 council members. 3 of those are at large, meaning they run citywide. They were just on the ballot in 2019. So coming up for this election, it is the 6 districts. So basically what I'm saying is this 210 square miles-ish of the city is divided into 6 districts or 6 territories. And so what I did with redistricting along with the citizen committee was take a look at those 6 districts with the current population, because they were last reviewed in 2016, and then make adjustments so that they are substantially equal in population as you can get them, because obviously it's not as simple as just taking the whole territory and say divide by 6. It's not that simple, because you are trying to keep neighborhoods together as much as you can. You're trying to use visual boundaries like Powers Corridor.
So it makes sense to people.
Those kind of things,
Right.
exactly. And so that information, and that went on last year. And so what we ended up doing to adjust that population across all 6 districts was move 20 precincts from one district to another to accommodate the population shift, but mostly to accommodate keeping communities of interest together, like neighborhoods, or like I said, using those visual dividing lines to make a dividing line between districts. Like Powers Corridor, for example, is the dividing line. The bottom half of Powers is the dividing line between the 5th district and the 6th district.
So it's not just this strange haphazard. It makes more sense to people.
It's highly, highly regulated through a lot of case law.
But it sounds like you're simplifying it by neighborhoods, and that helps.
For example, what we did this time was the 2nd district, which is your far north district, and the 6th district, which is your far east, so east of Powers predominantly. What I was able to do with those 2 is move the dividing line between the 2 districts to make it match the D11, D20 school district boundary line.
That makes sense.
We had enough of a population shift kind of in that whole area that I was able to match it up, because when you ask somebody on the street and you say, hey, do you know what district you're in, or what council district or state rep district or Senate, 9 times out of 10 they're going to tell you, I'm in Harrison, or I'm in D11, or I'm in D20, because that's what they know.
Right.
They're really cognizant as parents. You want your children to go to a certain school, you're going to know what the school board boundary is.
Or even just driving by the school, you realize where you are.
But you're not going to necessarily know all these other district lines. So we
True.
tried to move them to things that were common knowledge.
Okay, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so moving on to the ballot. So people are voting on those 6 district
Right.
seats, correct?
Right.
And we have candidates running in each of those districts.
We do. So once we completed drawing the new boundaries, setting those new boundaries, and they were just tweaks to the existing boundaries. We didn't throw out the whole map and start all over. They're just tiny tweaks that you're making every 4 years. So the importance of that is the 6 city council districts are on the April 6, 2021. I just said 2012. I'm blaming it on COVID.
That's okay. 2021, yes.
So those districts are now on the ballot, which means our candidates are running in those new districts, those new boundaries. And so what people are going to see when they go to their mailbox, we plan to mail ballots on March 12th. So look in your mailbox starting on the 12th and then the next few days, because it'll take a little bit to get those about 303,000 ballots in the city of Colorado Springs out there. When you open your ballot, what you'll see is one city council district and the candidates for that district. It is based upon where your address is. If your address falls within District 1, for example, which is kind of the UCCS area all the way over to the mountains. For example, if you live in that area, you're most likely in District 1. So when you open your ballot, you're going to see the District 1 and the candidates, and you'll see a question. City Council did refer a question to the ballot. So it's a one-page ballot. Couldn't be simpler. 8.5 by 11.
No excuse not to
You're going to
fill
have
it
to
out.
vote on two things, right? You're going to vote on a candidate and you're going to vote on the question.
And what is the question for folks
And the
who...
question is concerning changing the city charter to remove the 30-word limit on ballot questions for tax issues or TABOR, if you're familiar with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
So you're voting to either to remove that or not?
To remove the limit on how long the question can be.
Okay.
Right now, our local TABOR has
A restriction?
a restriction to the question can only be 30 words, and the first 5 to 10 are preset. And so what this, really would do would be, if you're in favor of that or not, if you'd like a longer question to explain what's happening, you vote one way. If you're fine with the way it is, you vote the other way. But it's really, up to the voter.
Okay,
to
but you're pointing
determine.
out a great thing, which is this is a really short, simple...
So the question
ballot.
itself is very short, and then the voter just needs to make that decision themselves. The candidate list, will not be an extremely long list on any of the races. But the most important thing is you're not voting on all 6 district reps. You're just going to vote on your district.
How do you find out what your district is? I think that's what some people may want to know.
So there is a section on the city website that shows what the map looks like, but most importantly, it has a lookup feature.
Yes.
Where you can type in an address and it will tell you you're in city council district whatever, and it'll show you who the current council member is, who the at-large, because those at-large, remember, represent us all, and it'll show you their contact information.
I think you can coloradosprings.gov/city council, I think is where, right?
You
is
can
where
find
people
there.
can
It's
go.
also on the election. A link is also
Or
on the election pages.
coloradosprings.gov/election, which that election webpage is a great place to go if
Right.
you have any questions at all about the election, and also how to register, correct? Make sure you're registered.
We do have a link to
link,
the
yeah.
El Paso County Clerk's website for you to get registration. You can also go to, it's called Go Vote Colorado. You can do .com or .gov. Look up what your registration information is. If you've moved, you can change your address. You can register that way if you have a driver's license, a valid driver's license. Otherwise, reach out to the county clerk's office and they can get you registered. If you have moved, please always remember to update your address as soon as possible. I know when you move, there's a lot of things you have to take care of, and a lot of times people don't think about voting. I need to update my address so my ballot finds me where I am, and they don't think about that until they call and go, I didn't get a ballot.
Right.
like,
But Sarah,
well,
now's
there's
the
a
time.
reason.
Now's the time to do that, right?
Now is the time to do it because we plan to mail ballots out March 12th to everyone. And like I said, there's 303,000 registered voters right now. That number is always changing.
Okay.
So get out there right now, govotecolorado.gov or .com and see what your information says.
And what would your words of encouragement be to folks just to get involved at this level? People who maybe haven't voted in a municipal election before or toss that ballot aside, and we're talking about how simple it is too, especially this ballot, but just how important it is in their everyday lives and the impact it has.
I think it's really important because think of it this way. I can say it's your patriotic duty. Our country was founded on the right to have a say. I can go that route, but I don't think that appeals to people now as much as it did, later. It just didn't appeal. So here's how to think about it. If you have a complaint, you want road potholes repaired, you want your street repaved or various other things that you can do. Think about it this way. Your council member is the closest government official to you. Each council of the district council members represents around 80,000 people. Now, you may say, gee, that's not that close. But it really is, because you could be at Safeway or King Soopers or Walmart or Target, or Costco or Sam's. You could be anywhere, the gas station, and you could see a council member. If you've gone on and looked up who your there are pictures showing you who they are. You can see them. They're much more accessible to you than a president. Great example is there are a tremendous amount of voters that only vote every 4 years. They vote for president.
Right. Or even the governor.
And I'm always mystified by that, because the odds of them actually being able to, meet and see or touch those elected officials is not as great. Governor's much closer because they're in your state, but your council person's right there with you. You're going to see them. You can come to city council meetings. You can watch them online. So, get involved. Always vote. I don't care what the election is. You have an opinion, and a lot of people aren't shy about expressing that opinion. And the greatest way to express that opinion is vote.
Right. Even better than
vote
being mean on
those
social media.
Are.
Right.
Yeah. Don't just sit home and complain about them.
Yes.
Vote.
Right. Make your opinion heard, for sure. Okay. So any last words? And my last question to you would be, do you have any common misconceptions or kind of myths or things you hear about elections that you would want to clear up, or just anything you would want to say to people? Last thoughts.
I think the biggest one is people think because they have a Colorado Springs address that they live within the city limits. That's not true. Because of the way the Postal Service does their addressing. So that lookup feature that we talked about a little earlier is vital. Because you
may be in the county
to find out if you live in the city. There's pockets all across the city that are not in the city limits. Think, for example, the biggest chunk of that, I would say, is the Cimarron Hills-ish area. They have Colorado Springs addresses, but they're not in our city.
Okay.
So make sure
people
you live
get
in the
confused
city.
by that and frustrated.
And they think that we've stolen their vote because they didn't get a ballot, when in fact they don't live there. The other thing is, a lot of people will say if the results are big enough between the winners and the losers, that we stop counting ballots, at a certain point. And that's not true. We count every ballot that is countable, meaning we first match on signature. That's why we ask you to sign that ballot, because we match that with signature records on file through the county clerk's office, like your driver's license. If we match it on signature, it's going to be counted. Every ballot we receive that's eligible will be counted. And if we can't match it on signature, we'll reach out to the voter to say, hey, we think maybe this isn't your signature. Verify that you did in fact cast the ballot. So all ballots are counted that are eligible to be counted.
You don't just say, that doesn't even look close. We're good for the night.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't. We don't. That was a myth that's been out there for years.
Okay.
Quite honestly. So it's really important you return your ballot as quick as possible, so that we can get those election results released after 7 p.m. on April 6th.
Well, thanks for all the work you do in these elections and otherwise. So many other different roles that City Clerk plays that I think people didn't realize.
Yeah, it's a fun job. We have great staff down there. We're super friendly to everybody. We try to be helpful, yet we do have laws and codes and those things that we have to implement. But we do try to be very helpful and, welcome any feedback, good or bad. You never improve unless you hear the bad, but it's also nice to have a little good thrown in there too.
Right.
So.
Here's some good. Thank you. Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. And we do want to remind folks, coloradosprings.gov/election if you'd like more information. And thanks so much for joining us on Behind the Springs.